Welcome to the PartsCast, your go-to podcast to hear thought leaders and experts in the food service industry discuss the latest trends, technology, and products that are shaping restaurants, commercial kitchens, and other businesses in our space. I'm your host, Matt Gentile, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about safety measures and the future of food service companies. Many of us have heard how different restaurants and food establishments pivoted and adapted during the COVID-19 pandemic. But what about those companies that service the equipment in those kitchens? Food service companies also had to implement stringent safety protocols and think of ways to operate remotely in a business that requires most of its staff to be in the field to make repairs and installations. We have two guests joining us from service companies today who will tell us how they navigated during the pandemic and what changes they think could stay going forward. First is TJ Coker, the Director of Operations for Coker Service, Inc., which services the Chicago area and the Austin and Houston areas. TJ, thanks for coming on. How are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
I'm doing okay. Can't complain. Our second guest is Tina Reese, Vice President at Commercial Appliance Parts and Service, Inc. in Florida. Tina, welcome back to the PartsCast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and look forward to having this discussion with both of you because I think everybody says this, it's like a broken record. The last year has been very unprecedented, and I wanted to get some thoughts from two respected people within the food service industry about how it's been like navigating the past year and maybe talk about some of the changes that could happen coming out of this. But to start, I wanted to go back to about a year ago when all this started, and we were all kind of learning things on the fly. And we'll start with you, Tina, and then go to TJ. As you saw restaurants and some of those other commercial kitchens start closing down temporarily or holding back their operations a little bit, what was running through your mind just regarding your service company during that time?
How do I keep my people safe? That was my number one thought. People were scared. I was scared. And I was glued to the news and updates. We've never been through anything like that. So my number one was, oh my gosh, what do I do to keep my people safe? And I believe we proactively jumped on board. We created a work from home environment, which is not a service company's protocol at all. So we quickly had to figure out IT, communication, how we do that. And, people aren't used to working from home either in a service company. So we quickly jumped on that and moved people out and continue to work because we are an essential business. So on the customer segment, we reached out to see if we could help in any way with shutting down their equipment. And our reps and our consultants were really helpful for us to market a lot of the stuff that we could do to try to help their people too. So that's kind of what first happened when it all started blowing up in April.
Front of mind for me, of course, was the employees as well. There were so many unknowns in the very beginning. So we really had to take a hard look at, where we were at as far as how long could we keep our doors open? How long could we keep people paid? It was pretty quick for us to put in place the mitigation, the temperature checks, the sanitation piece of it. That was pretty quick. We did move some folks out of the office to create that social distance. But we had a disaster plan in place that we had recently gone over and done prior to, just happenstance that it was prior to a pandemic. So we kind of had a plan in place for how we were going to handle payroll and how we were going to be able to cut down on certain expenses to keep things working. And it was successful. I mean, we have some really dedicated folks on our management team that came through and were just phenomenal.
And TJ, I wanted to ask you this because I know you're in a unique position because you service, like I said earlier, the Chicago area, which has had tighter restrictions throughout the whole pandemic. But you also have companies within the Austin, Houston area where restrictions have fluctuated a bit more. Has that been challenging just dealing with different circumstances with your companies?
Yeah, it's been maddening, honestly, with the various protocols in place. And, one day it's this and the next day they change it to that. And yeah, we kind of just went with whatever the strictest guidelines were and implemented them across both operations. just to make it easier for us to manage. So, the temperature checks and the PPE were everywhere, no matter where we were at. Um, we brought in a lot of new technology items too, so that helped keep up with it. We have the techs who are always remote on their tablets, but now they were able to also bring in a remote troubleshooting for our management team, so they could view into what our techs were doing to kind of help them along instead of coming on site with them, to where we had multiple people within the office, and creating barriers between, and unfortunately between the service team who was out in the field all the time, and our office folks who were still in the office, to try and mitigate that exposure between the folks who were out and about. So yeah, it was a challenge. It was really a challenge, and thankfully the Texas market stayed open for the most part, which helped keep everybody in the Chicago side afloat. We were able to bounce between the two.
TJ, you brought up there some of the different protocols that your company implemented and some new practices they implemented. I want to ask you, Tina, was there some other stuff that you guys implemented over at Commercial Appliance Parts and Service, things like PPE staggered schedules or things like that for your people in the field to operate during the early portions of the pandemic, especially?
Yeah, we did a lot immediately as well. We came up with a protocol and everybody's had to sign off of it. We had weekly meetings and weekly updates that we sent to all the employees. As far as our staff goes, techs were in the warehouse, but they weren't allowed into the offices. We actually kept our office staff to a minimum. Everybody was working from home, and we only had 2 at each branch functioning, and we kept them in separate areas. We stopped having the customers come in. We locked the doors for that. We had a call policy where if they needed something, they would call in and we would take it out, and then they could pick it up from there. And then we did the temperature checks and the CDC questions. We were very, very strict on any kind of protocol too. Even though Florida was kind of more of the typical open state, and there was a lot of controversy around how you should do what, we stuck to strict protocol that the CDC provided. And with that, I got to say, we had very minimal cases. It worked. We didn't provide PPE for everybody.
I do want to ask the question about PPE. Was that a bit of a struggle? I know early the supply chain seemed really out of whack for those kind of things like PPE and sanitizers, things like that. Was that an issue for either one of you? I'll start with you, Tina.
Yeah, absolutely. The masks were the number one issue. I mean, there was no mask to be found, and healthcare were trying to do that. So we went out and had seamstresses make masks and handed them out to everybody. And at the very, very beginning, we actually had guys with bandanas on their faces, so that's when we went, okay, we need to do something about this quick. And then as far as our technicians in the customer place, we let the customer know in advance that the tech couldn't be around staff working. We altered our hours. We said, hey, is it, if you would like us in when your staff's not there, that's good for us, but we do have to keep this protocol. And we did seamless payments, but that was already starting, kind of like what TJ does as well. We've already had that in place. The only thing we stopped was having the customer sign the tablet. There was no contact with the tablet whatsoever.
Yeah, I can remember there were many mornings that it was a 5 a.m. wake up call to get to the hardware store by 6 a.m. to see if they had put out any more masks for our guys. It was a struggle in the beginning, and like Tina mentioned, we had some folks on staff who were handy with a sewing machine, and they were more than willing to pump out some masks for our folks in the service team. But it was a struggle. Gloves we've always had. That's kind of a normal thing for a service company to have, is the gloves. But masks were definitely a struggle. But I do have to say, the adoption of the PPE has been phenomenal. Our team has taken it very seriously. Our techs have taken it very seriously, and they appreciate the fact that there's the availability of those items for them. So I think that was a huge relief that everybody took it seriously.
Yeah, and I want to actually follow up on that real quick. Are these some things for both of you that aside from COVID-19, as we start to come out of the pandemic, are there some of these things that you were thinking about keeping in place with maybe video diagnostics or anything related to, contactless that you might end up keeping as you start coming out of the pandemic? And I'll start with you on that, Tina.
I would say a large part of it is we are very conscious of cleanliness now. We still wipe down areas. We still kept between the parts customers and our parts people, we still kept the plexiglass up. We allow them in now, but we keep that. We, as of right now, we're still even wearing the mask. I don't see us continuing that if guidelines change, and Florida did just change on that. I think it'll be an option for a technician to some, I think whatever people feel that's right for them is what's going to happen. But I think in a way it helped a lot of things in certain ways, because now my guys had to sit back and think about safety in a different way. So now in all aspects of safety, they're more aware. And I think that has really been a positive change in everything. It's not just the COVID thing that they're working about. It's just help them learn awareness.
And for you, TJ, are there things that you're thinking about keeping around post-pandemic, like the video diagnostics that you brought up, or the, I guess, diagnostic calls, or anything else that you're thinking about continuing to roll with?
Yeah, absolutely. We plan on keeping in place all of the sanitation measures that we've started. Not only did we keep our folks safe from COVID, but we also had exceptionally low sick calls for non-COVID related items, which I attribute to the fact that we're doing all this extra effort for cleanliness and awareness of personal space and those things. As far as the masks go, as long as they're mandated, we'll be required to keep them on, and our customers are really going to drive that. A lot of restaurants, a lot of grocery stores, even though it may not be required, are still requiring it themselves. So, which is fine. Our folks are real used to it by now. So it's kind of second nature at this point to grab one before you go inside somewhere. But yeah, in the remote diagnostics thing, we're absolutely keeping that. That has been a great tool for training and a great selling point for customers.
And we've seen it with other things during the pandemic that it's accelerated some trends that were kind of growing already. And I feel like that was one that we've heard about for a while, this idea of eliminating the service call that might take a lot of time, but is really something quick, and being able to just do that diagnostics over the phone or video. I can imagine like that's a really helpful point of that too.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. It's a pain point for the customer though, sometimes when they're anxious to get something done or get off the phone. They're not real interested in jumping on your video call. But as far as the remote help for the technicians, it's phenomenal.
TJ, I actually wanted to ask you something specific, because I remember in the Fed group earlier this year, you had mentioned that you were, I think, administering or using COVID test kits for your employees. And I'm just curious, what made you decide to do that? And was that successful when you implemented it?
It was an opportunity that came about with a friend of the family who's a physician and was able to provide these test kits. So we were able to, and still are, testing all of our employees for COVID every week. So they have the personal assurance that they're not taking it home to their family after they've been out in every restaurant known to man all week, and then also that we're keeping each other safe within the office. It also has the positive end where folks want to travel, go on vacation. Those tests also provide those clearances to get on airplanes and travel abroad. So it's been really helpful, and it was very, very, very inexpensive. I was surprised at how inexpensive. But yeah, it's something I plan on continuing until the CDC says that we can stop the COVID.
And Tina, has there been anything I don't know if you had something similar with test kits or anything like that, but was there anything with the testing element that you encouraged, or that kind of said like, hey, if you're showing certain symptoms, please go get tested? Was there anything like that? You did mention the awareness aspect being a big thing from your crew there, but was there anything that you guys did to encourage some of that?
They didn't meet the protocols on the questions. That they didn't come in, and then if there was any kind of exposure, it was reported, and they quarantined for 14 days, or they waited 5 days and went and got a test and provided a negative. So that was their choice, that way we didn't and force them to take the test, but the majority of them were very happy taking the test and then bringing back a negative on it as well. And we still follow that protocol today. I mean, we haven't stopped in any way with any of the making sure that people are safe around us and don't have symptoms.
So, I think we've kind of said over and over how this pandemic certainly, I think, tested a lot of service companies, tested a lot of restaurants. We tested the whole country on what they can do, but I think it does show a lot of resolve too. And I want to ask both of you, what was something that you learned about the pandemic regarding your companies? There's something you learned about your staff, something specific to your operations that you learned coming out of this? And I'll start with you, Tina.
The biggest thing I learned that we truly are one big family, and not just our staff, but our customers as well. The biggest thing is everybody stood up and helped each other. Obviously when it got really bad, there were some furloughs and all that, and those that were left on picked up the slack, took the work, made us successful. They kept in touch with those that were in furlough. But our customers were the same way. We reached out to see if there was anything we could do for them at the time. When it was really slow, the restaurants came together and fed people that had lost their jobs and stuff. And so our team, because it was slow, were able to go out and help prepare that food and get it out too. So I think the positive out of that was that we realized that we all are there for each other, and I think that was valuable.
Yeah, I would agree on that note. We really are a family. We've been touting it for forever, and it really shone through when folks started realizing just how scary the whole thing was. I mean, they were shutting down everything. Grocery stores were limiting people inside, and folks were running out of toilet paper, and it was crazy. So we had people who would, hey, I heard that you're on your last roll of toilet paper. Well, here, I got a case of toilet paper that I just picked up, and, helping each other out, just, the day-to-day things that you don't even realize that you've got a whole group of folks that are part of your extended family. And like Tina mentioned, we had a rough go of it for a while there, trying to figure out, what do we do with our guys that, we don't want to have to let them go because, they're so hard to get back. So we did a lot of volunteering. We had our guys out in food banks, packaging up food, delivering food for Meals on Wheels with seniors, just anything and everything we could do so that they could, that their time was, being productive. So that was probably the most surprising and also the most comforting thing that we had from the entire experience.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's great to hear that you both kind of learned that coming out of this, because I think that's one thing that doesn't get talked about that much. I think it's overlooked how much these communities and these businesses really rallied around their staff or their people, and really how the community rallied around those businesses as well. I want to wrap up with just a question or two just about coming out of this right now and what we're seeing across the country. We're seeing more restaurants with eased restrictions, or more places easing restrictions on restaurants. And we're also seeing places open back up as more people get vaccinated, as we start learning more about the virus that we didn't know a year ago. And I wanted to ask, what do you expect the landscape to look like going forward? I'll start with you, Tina, and then we'll go to TJ on this one.
Well, in the South market, obviously we've opened up quite a bit, and because tourism is very important, those that were shut down were able to get into Florida. And so our business, we see very positive. Things are starting to move. Restaurants are open. There were a few that were lost, but they went from the 30 to the 50 and then full capacity now. And so things are moving forward. What is interesting is our installation business has really been off the roof too. So I don't know if that's some of the stimulus money that was given out But so I see nothing but upwards movement for our industry and for our company as a whole.
We're looking at everything with cautious optimism. We've kind of been shell shocked with COVID on getting too excited about the positive numbers or trends. In Chicago, we saw it was pretty devastating for the restaurant industry. There was a lot of restaurants that just won't ever make it back, had to shut their doors, and it's sad because as you both know, the restaurant scene in Chicago is phenomenal. So for us to lose a lot of those staples was rough. But we are seeing the same thing. Installations are really picking up, so there seems to be a lot of development there. Hopefully, we'll come back to the 100% mark, and our Texas office is definitely doing fine. They're picked up right where they left off. It's like nothing ever happened out there, so that's a positive piece too.
And one last question, because we see the one trend that seemed to really pick up with restaurants through the pandemic, and it was something that was happening before the pandemic, was delivery and takeout. And I want to start with you on this one, TJ. Do you think that could change how service companies operate in any way? And if so, how can that change the way that service companies handle things like installation and repairs going forward?
I see that, the ghost kitchens were coming up as a thing right before COVID, and they really took off during, because all their business was coming out of delivery. I see that being a trend where, we're working in a ghost kitchen type setup where there's many customers in one building, where we can put a technician in a building for a day versus traveling about. But other than that, I don't see much change for us in our industry. It's you still got to get the tech to the location, and they still got to get the parts that they need. So not much changes in that logistics game, but I do see that one piece with the ghost kitchens being a difference.
I agree with TJ 100%. We still do what we do, and it takes a qualified tech to do it, and we still need the parts. The landscape may change of where we're working at. I've heard some places are putting up kitchens and parking lots that are feeding. That's a new concept. Trucks, but regardless, I don't think we will change how we do our business.
TJ, Tina, this was a great conversation. And like I said earlier, I know a lot of folks in the food service industry, they really respect both of your insights and opinions. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and stories with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the PartsCast. Be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you stream your podcasts.